You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org.
Reporting and supporting what matters. This is CT Examiner Weekly.
Connecticut's congressional delegation is the fourth oldest in the country, almost 10 years older than the nation's average. But with 6 members of Congress dying this session alone, is it time to ask, how old is too old? I'm reporter Luke Feeney with that story.
Old Lyme is one of the last small towns between New York and Stonington on the I-95 corridor. But with the state pushing for more housing and less local control, an open seat on zoning has sparked a hot fight about the future of the town. I'm reporter Charlotte Harvey with the story.
When state legislators cleared the way for towns to install speed cameras, a lot of local leaders were ecstatic. And why not? With the towns facing high costs and tight budgets, cameras can generate a lot of money. But now some drivers are up in arms. I'm Nick Sambides, and I'll have that story.
From national poets to castles in the sand, I'm Robin Breeding with a look at what's happening around the state and beyond.
And I'm Editor-in-Chief Gregory Stroud in the studio in Old Lyme with the staff of CT Examiner, and I'm joined by Associate Editor Liana Teixeira. Welcome, everyone, to the roundtable. And Liana, this week, what's the word?
The word this week, I probably should say 2 words, is public scrutiny. And from everything from the age of Connecticut's congressional delegation, Old Lyme zoning seat, and speed cameras getting pushback from residents, public criticism is front and center this week in a lot of our stories. And the question, too, of how federal and local officials are going to be responding to that.
So it's scrutiny. Everyone is looking at their local delegation. They're looking at their federal delegation. They're wondering if they represent them. And I think one of the stories is whether it's even possible for a member of Congress who's 80 years old or 83 years old to represent, fairly, maybe the younger generation, the people that are looking for housing, that are looking for jobs, that are paying off student loans. Can they connect? And Luke Feeney, you were working with our reporter in Washington, D.C. with the story. And so what were you hearing?
Yeah, so the sort of impetus for this story, I guess, was Senator Mitch McConnell, the longtime senator from Kentucky. He had been having health problems for a while, and I had been sort of tracking that, kind of wondering, is he going to die? Because this has been a problem we've seen with Congress. Members have been dying. 5 members have died this year alone before the death of Senator Lindsey Graham.
So we have the death of Lindsey Graham. So in some ways, that's the key spark. And we respond and we look at our delegation. We say, God, Connecticut, we have the 4th oldest delegation in Congress, and it's 10 years older than the average delegation, which is like 53 or something. So we have Rosa DeLauro. She's 83 years old. We have Senator Richard Blumenthal, and he's 80 years old. And we have John Larson, and he's
77 years old.
77 years old. And so these people have been in Congress for a long time, and there's some benefits from being in Congress a long time.
Yeah, and I spoke to 2 political science professors about that exact thing, and there is, to an extent, if you gain experience, you're able to understand the institution better. You're able to effectively bring back more benefits for your constituents. That's sort of been the classic argument for extended incumbency. However, some of the detractors have argued, if seniority is what it's supposed to be and benefits us, why are we all still struggling?
So in the sense is Connecticut, have they brought home the bacon, if you will? Part of it is that in the old days, you'd work your way through Congress and you'd take over a seat on the House and Ways and Means Committee, or you would, I think Rosa DeLauro was the head of appropriations when the Democrats were in control. That's normally a big deal to any, local resident. That she potentially could bring home a lot of money, but Congress doesn't really work that way quite like it used to.
No, and some of it has been attributed to intense partisanship. We've sort of seen the parties become more and more ideologically opposed and divided over the past few years. Some of it is, I learned political science in college, and one of the things you learn is the hardest race to win when you're running for Congress is the first one. And once you win that first one, once you're in, it's really, really hard to get out.
And so you talk to some of the challengers, right? Some of the younger people that are facing off against these older incumbents are in their own party.
Yeah, and they are sort of making that argument that the current delegation is just a little out of touch and is not really in step with what modern day working people are struggling from. Larson's 3 primary challengers are all under 50, and all of them made that exact argument to me.
So Charlotte, you're right out of college. What have you heard about this?
So one of the things, at least in Luke's story, that I found the most fascinating is the idea that some of these legislators are older than the average age of death for American men. And the idea in college, at least in political science classes that I took, are how are we supposed to expect these people to legislate for our future when they aren't going to be there, most likely? And I think that's a really good point.
How much of this are you seeing being driven by young people, not as candidates, but as people like of your age group who are just getting into politics or are maybe looking around and fed up with what they're seeing?
I mean, I don't think you have to look that far. Look at New York. Zoran Mamdani's defeat of Andrew Cuomo, while a lot of people now like to say it was, inevitable, that was a huge upset at the time. Andrew Cuomo was the former governor. He has a lot of political power. I remember when he made that announcement, I was in Brooklyn at the time, and people were acting like it was a shoo-in. And that upset happened. And then flash forward to a year later, 3 incumbent Democrats lost their seats to younger progressive challengers. And I think this is a development we're seeing around the country. I think Congress has not been working for a while. And I think there is a level of anger from people of my generation about it.
The fact that young people are living in their parents' basement, and more, a pretty high percent of people 30 and under living with their parents, it's hard to feel the urgency of housing. For older commentators, for older reporters, frankly, for older politicians, it's a little bit of a punchline, but it's not such a punchline if you're living in your parents' basement.
I mean, no, and it's a lot easier for someone who is established, who has a home, to be like, well, it's not that big of a deal. But I do think there is a level of urgency, and, Larson's challenger spoke to this as well, that they have the urgency to meet the moment that someone older does not.
And frankly, it's hard to remember this, but it hasn't. When Joe Biden started out, he was the young one. When John Kerry started out, he was the young one. That these people, sometimes that they were the young challengers way back when, in that 60s, post-60s moment, and they're still here.
Yeah.
And we saw with the aging Joe Biden there was a question of who's really in charge. Is it Joe Biden or is it really the staff? Because the staff knows that when Joe Biden goes, they go, actually. It means that the staff become more and more powerful. The lobbyists become more and more powerful because the Congress people don't really know what's going on. And Nick?
I have to say, in all my years on this planet, I've never seen people in their teens and early 20s attacked like they have been by predatory finances, by high college costs, by the high cost of housing. I think that there are legitimately terrible sharks in the water that have made it impossible for young kids to fulfill the American dream.
So Charlotte, I think we're going to have to wrap this one up. But I wanted to take this story and transpose it, take it down from the national level to the local level, because you've been in Old Lyme and you've seen a hot zoning fight. And a lot of zoning is about housing, and that's a young people's issue in many ways. And in Old Lyme, let's face it, we have a fairly senior zoning board. We have one member of zoning who has been on zoning since 1972. And so we have a young challenger, a young alternate, and his name was Michael Barnes, and he's like 30, 31. And what happened?
What happened was the Democratic Town Committee made something of a backroom deal with the first select woman to put forward their preferred candidate. And that's who was ultimately chosen.
So in this case, they, rather than going with the younger candidate, they went with the former first select woman, Bonnie Riemschneider, and brought her back into politics. She had been out of politics because she had faced a scandal at the Connecticut Port Authority. And they said it's time to bring this promising politician, who's now significantly older, back and give her a seat on zoning to decide some of the issues, the most important issues that any town faces. Luke?
So, Charlotte, in preparing for this segment, I read your story, and I've also seen so many letters to the editors talking about Michael Barnes. Why do you think there's such a disconnect between what ultimately the commission decided and what the public wants?
I can't speak to what the select people were thinking. All I can speak to is the drastic difference between all of the people that came out to support Michael Barnes, that wrote in to support Michael Barnes, and the one person who spoke in favor of Bonnie Riemschneider. That difference is stark, and I can't speak to why there was that disconnect.
One of the most interesting things, I think, is that Michael Barnes was actually a seated alternate for 6 years. So he has been on the zoning board as an alternate for 2,000 hours of his life. And he was told that he was not a team player. And so he was bypassed over a person who has absolutely no zoning experience at all.
So let's step back. This is a small town fight. They're public personalities. These people, some of these people, they've grown up in the town. But this is a local story that's happening across Connecticut. It's happening in other states, and it's a story about the right to build, the right to block building, the idea of what is a small town? Should there be small towns on I-95 on the corridor? Some people say basically, we've given you an exit. You give us development, and it's a deal. And certainly on the state level, a lot of towns are facing pressure to develop. And part of the reason they want to develop is, well, it's money. Another reason is because of housing, right? I know here that there's no way that anyone on this staff really that doesn't already have a house can likely live in the town of Old Lyme. There really aren't any rental properties.
The thing that amazes me too is that you have in Hamden like something similar where you have all these younger candidates that are trying to get on, and they're being shut down by what some people feel is the same old, and in this case, Democratic Party leadership that's been there for a long time, that has a handle on power and just doesn't want to let go.
So in some ways, and that's one of the questions that we have in these towns, like you have the power, or you have a house, you have a foothold here, and will you let in younger people? And it's not an easy question. I know most staff at CT Examiner end up living and commuting from Middletown, or from Meriden, or from New Britain, or and it is a burden of sorts. And I mean, these towns though have the advantage that they're younger. There's more going on. But there's the other question is, what about Connecticut cities? Like, should we be developing and growing Connecticut cities? This is a state that has not one real big healthy city. New York has New York City, Massachusetts has Boston, Connecticut has.
I may be exposing my ignorance here, but why wouldn't you consider? I don't think Hartford's at that level, but Hartford's a pretty big city, no?
The metro area is the metro area has quite a few people, but the actual city itself, not so many. What it has is it has wealthy suburbs. It has a small tax base. It struggles, and so
A closer city I would consider fitting that mold is probably New Haven. It's a little better with walkability. There is more affordable units and housing down there. It's still not up to par with what these big cities are, and it's not going to attract the kind of development that is needed. But it's definitely, I think, the closer of the two.
we certainly have been seeing quite a bit of housing going into New Haven, and we've seen quite a bit of housing, at least on the high end, going into Stamford. I mean, one of the topics that we had recently, we had someone in to talk about building affordable housing, and she said, I'd like to build more housing in New London, but it's hard to get funding. It's hard to get the subsidies that you need to build affordable housing because it's not a priority. So you can get state and federal dollars to help fund housing in Old Lyme or Stonington or these wealthier towns, but not in our cities.
Connecticut has always had problems with its cities in the sense that they have a lack of identity. There's almost an identity crisis of Connecticut cities. Once upon a time, they were known for manufacturing, but that's decades ago.
One of the things that I find really interesting about the affordable housing debate is that, all of these towns, Connecticut as a whole is aging. And one of the things that happens with that is that your workforce depletes. And when your workforce depletes, your economy suffers from it. So all of these towns are facing budget issues and revenue issues, and they're wondering how to fix it. And the thing is, they're not bringing in people who will work in the town and who will support businesses in the town. And I mean, speaking personally, I right now am driving an hour to work every day, and it's because the town I live in, I can afford to live in. I know so many young people that they have to commute to work. And so even though they're supporting the businesses in the towns they work in the sense that they work there, they're not taxpayers. They're not people contributing in that way.
And this is something we've seen in Essex and Stonington and Old Lyme, which is a lack of volunteers for the boards. And this came up with the fight over zoning, because people said, why should I sit for 6 years as an alternate if I can't get a permanent seat? I've volunteered this long. Haven't I kind of earned it? And if these towns don't have their volunteers, it's a New England staple, volunteer government, then those people are going to have to be hired. And then you have to find them, you have to attract them, you have to pay them, you have to house them. And it's not so easy. And we see some towns like Essex, for example, that has gone more professional, that hires more staff, but more staff comes also at a cost of higher taxes.
And to go off that point, Greg, I think it's very interesting because, in the previous segment, we were talking about the benefits of experience. Here, they even said the argument for Schneider was that she brought a level of expertise that maybe Barnes lacked. But I thought that was really interesting because, kind of as we've mentioned, this guy's been sitting in meetings for thousands of hours. What about her expertise did they value more than someone who has been in the room for what sounds like years at this point?
Her expertise in municipal government and knowing how processes work, as far as how things work, how you're supposed to cooperate with one another, how things get done. No particular experience with zoning specifically, but just experience with governing.
So Nick, last night you were in Fairfield.
Yes, I was.
And that's a town that is probably really at the heart of a lot of debates about zoning and housing and development in Connecticut. In fact, Alexis Harrison, who was on their zoning board, was one of the leading opponents statewide of affordable housing. But you were there for another reason, and that was speed cameras. So tell us about that.
I came into the meeting not really knowing what to expect, and I saw a meeting that was suffused with anger. A lot of it. People were mad. A substantial portion of a crowd of about, I'd say 300 people. And many of them were ripping angry that they got $50 and $75 speeding tickets in town.
So this was a story that, we followed, say, 3 years ago, and this is when the state legislature was clearing the way for installing speed cameras. And some of the conversation was about pedestrians dying. What we've seen since COVID is pedestrian deaths, which had been going down for decades, are up. And so why are they up? In part because people are driving like maniacs. And part of the way to maybe do something about it is speed cameras.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of basis in the idea that Connecticut has lost far too many people to pedestrian accidents, motor vehicle accidents, all kinds of things like that. And speed is a fundamental element of it. If you're traveling at, say, 20 miles an hour and you hit something or somebody get in an accident, there's maybe a 20% chance of that accident resulting in a fatality. The chances jump up to close to 70 or 80% when you get like 55 or 60 miles an hour.
And Nick, you mentioned that there was a lot of anger in this meeting. Why the anger, though? Did they feel they were being unnecessarily ticketed? Did they feel their tickets weren't justified? Or was there something else?
It was all that. And it was also the idea that essentially they were being tried and convicted by a machine. The town bent over backwards to try to get people used to these things. They extended the periods of warning tickets instead of actual tickets. They threw out a lot of tickets. So the town leaders last night were put in a position of, we've given you all the breaks we can, and you're still complaining.
So it's maybe falls into this greater unease about from AI or from this idea of how technology is ruining our lives or running our lives. But there's also another piece, right? I mean, we passed a police accountability bill several years ago now that kind of discouraged traffic stops. So it discouraged the human element
right
of traffic enforcement, in part because there was a fear that it was unfair. And so we've got cameras. The cameras don't say, are you black? Are you white? Are you Latino? Are you smoking pot? They say, are you driving too fast? And here's your ticket.
Right. They make the decision in an instant. And a lot of people see it as an invasion of privacy, or at least the potential for one, because some cameras can peer into your windshield, through your windshield, and see who you are driving. Cameras all record license plate data. The company that runs Fairfield's cameras says that they will destroy the data they collect within 30 days. A lot of people just plainly didn't believe that.
I have to say that when the news of these traffic cameras really broke, and it broke big, it was in a small town. It was Washington, Connecticut. And the story was not safety. The story was, it wasn't privacy. The story was, wow, they collected like $500,000 in like a month.
Fairfield had exactly the same thing happen. Their projection was for $1.1 million in the first month. And for any municipality, it's found money. And really, when you get into it, it's the cheapest way to enforce speed laws. There is nothing else that compares.
So one thing we need to look at, I think, and one story that we've talked about, is if millions of dollars are coming into towns outside of the budgeting process. Technically, I think this money is supposed to be what they call encumbered. That means it has strings, it has rules. You can't just use it for just anything. But I'm not sure anyone's actually looking over the shoulders of the town leaders. And so, Nick, do you have any sense of where this money's going?
Yeah, in Fairfield, they're putting it toward road improvements. They can't put it toward personnel per se. They can put it toward road improvements and capital projects. And here's the problem with what you're saying. The money is encumbered. It should go only towards specific uses. But in Fairfield, they've budgeted it already. They've expected that they would get $1.1 million a month, at least in the first month. And so if they come up significantly short of that, or if their budget projections don't match what they actually get, now the money's got to come from somewhere else.
So certainly we will be back with this story. We'll be back with traffic safety. I know we're working on wrong way drivers and cameras right now. It's amazing how many people are driving the wrong way on 95. But there's more to CT Examiner than the news. We always wrap up the show with a look at the arts calendar. I think it's the best arts calendar in the state. And Robin Breeding, our arts editor, is in the studio. What do we have?
Well, Greg, starting out on July 27th, up at the Keeler Tavern Museum in Ridgefield, they're having a Poetry in the Garden session with Cornelius Eady and Marilyn Nelson. And these are both national level poets. This is the last reading of the season. They've been doing it for 6 years. And actually, Cornelius Eady just spoke and read a poem at Zoran Mamdani's inauguration in New York City. They're very high level poets, and it would be a great, beautiful place to go to a 1713 house and sit in the garden and listen to poetry.
There's a power to the spoken word. And that's Keeler Tavern Museum in Ridgefield, July 27th. Doors open at 6:30.
All right, I like this. It's called Summer Sings. And every summer since 1991, the Con Brio Society has gotten people together to sing in Old Saybrook. And they show up at the First Christ Church in Old Saybrook and sing together. They get scores. This time it's going to be Handel's Messiah, the Novello edition. So everybody can go. You don't have to be a professional. You just come out to the church and everybody can sing together. I thought that was great.
I've heard the acoustics there are very good, and I've always heard good things about Con Brio, and that is August 3rd, 7 p.m., the First Church of Christ in Saybrook.
And it's $20 to get the score to read. And they also have other events coming up on August 10th and August 17th with Carmina Burana and For a Requiem. All right. Grace Farms is a beautiful museum foundation in New Canaan, Connecticut. And it has a very sort of Philip Johnson style glass building that they hold their events in. And on Thursday, August 6th, from 6 to 8 p.m., they're having dinner from the garden at Grace Farms. So you could get together and they will be cooking a beautiful dinner with handcrafted cocktails. And I think it sounds like a very pretty place to go and have dinner and enjoy yourself.
So these food events have turned into, one of the things to do in the summer in Connecticut, whether it's the Yellow Farmhouse in Stonington. I hear that Daniel Boulou will be in around Washington, Connecticut this summer. And in New Canaan, we have dinner from the garden at Grace Farms, and that's $75.
Yep. All right. 49th year of the annual sand sculpture contest in Milford. It's at Walnut Beach, August 8th, 10:30 to 4 p.m. And anybody can come out and build sandcastles. You can enter. You don't have to pay anything.
I've covered that and and participated in it. I mean, that was years ago.
Great.
And the castles they build, the stuff they build is amazingly ornate, elaborate. You'd be surprised you can do that much with sand.
I think it's one of the biggest sandcastle events on the entire East Coast here. So,
and Robin, is there anything else to do in Connecticut?
No, not this week. I'm suggesting an event that is going to be in Boston. And what I like about this, it's the Otis House is going to be closing for a major renovation. It is one of the oldest houses by Charles Bulfinch. And it was built for Harrison Gray, who was a lawyer who was instrumental in creating Beacon Hill. So it's the last. You can go up until August 30th to see this house before it goes under a major restoration. And it looks absolutely beautiful.
So it's a National Historic Landmark. So that's the Otis House, and that's 141 Cambridge Street, Boston, Massachusetts. And the price starts at $7 to $15, depending on
how old you are. That's it for this week. I think there's a lot of fun things to do.
I think this was a great edition of CT Examiner Weekly, and we will be back next week, as always, because the news is never done.
For more news and events, or if you want to send in comments or story ideas, please go to ctexaminer.com. And if you want to support our mission of keeping Connecticut informed of the news that matters, a subscription is just $20 for the entire year. Reporting and supporting what matters. This has been CT Examiner Weekly. Thanks for listening.